Hello gang, this is going to be my second tour guide in Exile video, and not as long as the previous one, and it's not done like the previous one in the sense that though it's about Trafalgar Square, it's not how we would do it on the bus necessarily. Like, we leave what we call stop number 8, I still remember the stop numbers, next to Canada House, and then come down the west side of the square, out round the south down to Whitehall. And we don't go out the other side unless we're on diversion, unfortunately. So it feels scattered-brained. It's not made up, but it feels made up in the sense that there's no structure. I'm sort of improvising, as it were, so you might get that impression, hence why I forgot to mention the fourth plinth. If I was more technically minded, and I'm trying my best with what I've got, I would tally up the clips, the photos anyway, with what I'm saying. So like if I mentioned the fourth plinth, which as I said I forgot, it would have come on, but it's an audio visual thing. I'm not really good at this sort of thing, unfortunately. I would say be kind, but I support Portsmouth, I'm used to grief, ha ha. So try and enjoy it, enjoy yourselves and today, because it's really hot here in Britain. Well, hot for us is about 23, 24 degrees, I think they said on the news, and we can't go outside. And not that I'm a social animal, but it would be nice to. So anyway, without me blabbering on, what will follow will be the clip as such, the audio clip with some photos I've taken of Trafalgar Square. All of the photos of mine, I should add, from 2009 all the way through to, I think the last photo I added was one 2016. But the beauty of Trafalgar Square is that it's not really changed at all, other than the top of the square, which is now pedestrianised, and there used to be a road. So watch your films like Sink the Bismarck, etc., and it's in there somewhere. Were I to log all the times I ever visited or been to or through Trafalgar Square in some shape or form, on the quiet, it's probably quite a lot. It's a place you can't get away from in London sometimes. It seems to form the centre of London, and the geographic heart of the capital, historically, is where the Charles I statue is, just off Trafalgar Square. So it sits at the centre of Trafalgar, at London at that, and it's part of the West End, and it's the last of the West End you see on the bus until you reach Covent Garden, because you enter Westminster. But it's always been a place that I've went round into, and it was built in the 1820s, and it's always been as a focal point, really. Where the square is now used to be where the barracks for some of the Queen's or the Monarch's guards were based, and where the National Gallery is now at the top of the square was once where the stables were, the Royal Mews that are now at Buckingham Palace. And I say I've been to the square. At university, I often, at Christmas time especially, ended up in the square. My campus was above Oxford Circus on Upper Regent Street, and sometimes after uni, fetch up there when I would walk back from St Paul's, and it's weirdly a place you can sort of unwind when the fountains are working, and they weren't working much before the fire stopped the buses. There's something about it in that regard. But ever since the square opened in the late 1820s, it's been a centre really of protests and demonstrations. One of the first was the Chartists around 1828, who took over the square and held out against a police force of the day, because the Met wasn't founded yet, and did so for a couple of days until it started raining, and the British don't do anything when it rains, apparently. Since then, you've had all manner of protests and demonstrations. For instance, during the time Jack the Ripper was doing his nasty business in the 1880s, homeless and unemployed people, largely from the East End, turned up in Trafalgar Square, and they just filled it out. There wasn't really a protest as such. It got turned into a shanty town, I suppose, in a way. And the authorities from Queen Victoria down were concerned. They thought this was revolution. And Britain has been fairly lucky to escape revolution. I mean, people call the English civil wars because technically there were two in the 1640s, and then we had a third brief one after Cromwell took power. But, the Civil War is considered a revolution, and they call 1688 the Glorious Revolution, but it wasn't really anything. So this, in the 1880s in Trafalgar Square, was causing some problem, they say. But they drifted away. All these people wanted was money, a job, a life. And times are tough in this country now, but these people were suffering in abject poverty compared to what people are now, in a way. The East End was a place, in a way, you didn't go to for the heck of it. You can go to Whitechapel now, and it's not my favourite part of town, but there's things to do. And Shoreditch is in that region, sort of north of it anyway, and I guess technically it's not the East End, but things have changed. So they came down, and then there were protests for like the First World War and the anti-nuclear marches and everything in the 60s and whatever. And recently, as hopefully the photos show you, the student protests 2010, which the day I was there, I had met Ian Hislop, and later they went off, and some of them anyway, to the Palladium and tried attacking Prince Charles and Camilla in their car. Again, people said there was a revolution coming, but hopefully that won't be, because revolutions by tradition don't solve much, it seems. Well, it solves something, but it causes more problems. Look at Robespierre, one of the driving forces of the French Revolution, excuse me, and he ends up being executed at some point a year or so later. The Russian Revolution descended into a civil war, and then communism was what it was. So Trafalgar Square sees that, and then you had the poll tax riots, of course, in 1990, and I was too young to remember that, but things were set on fire. We've had the Extinction Mob, who vandalised Nelson's lions with graffiti, and but then there's been celebration, of course. In recent memory, the 2012 Olympic bid, July 6th, 2005. I just finished college, getting ready for uni in a couple of months, and it was on BBC News and we were waiting to hear about the bid. We'd made it to the final 3 or 4, whatever, and I'll never forget that day in a way, because I think I was getting changed to go into town and had one leg in my trousers, and I think Kelly Holmes, and a couple of others were up there on that thing before Nelson's column, and there was a big screen, but then they of course went live. I think they were in Singapore doing it, and that chap of course going, the 2012 Olympics go to, and my heart went on it. I thought, it better be London, and then they said London, and Trafalgar Square went nuts. And then of course the next day London was hit by suicide bombers. Indeed, one of the greatest celebrations probably in Trafalgar Square's history would have been VE Day in 1945, when people filled that square like no end and raided in the fountains. And at the same time, we've got, throughout the course of the year in Trafalgar Square, a succession usually of events. We would have had on Good Friday Jesus walking through the square to be crucified at Nelson's column, which is a sentence you never hear in the Bible, but they recreate the Passion in the square now for a few years. And there's Jewish holidays, Islamic holidays, Buddhism probably. We've had all manner of things. I mean, I worked on the job for a year, and there was always something going on every so often. And in the shape of the original tour, 2.5 months, you went through Trafalgar Square 3 times usually on a single tour, so I know it quite well. It feels, and hopefully the square will always be there. And just off the east side of it, you've got South Africa House if you ever want to get out of the country quickly, and that's when Nelson Mandela spoke for the first time after release from prison. Top edge of the top northeast of the square, St Martin in the Fields Church, the official parish church of Buckingham Palace. It has connections to the Royal Navy, because the Admiralty is off the southeast southwest corner of the square, with Admiralty Arch, your most prominent fixture as far as Trafalgar Square is concerned. And of course on the west side, Canada House, home of our Canadian friends in London. Beneath it, Charing Cross Tube Station, which is one of the most convoluted names in London, in the sense that it and the next station along on the Bakerloo Embankment have had more name changes and confusing name changes that neither of them technically reflect where they are nowadays. For instance, in Charing Cross's case, it was once Trafalgar Square, and then it was Trafalgar Square, Charing Cross, and then it became Charing Cross. And if you look on Wikipedia or something, there's like 6 names it's had. Embankment was once Charing Cross, and then became Embankment for reasons best known to itself. Nonetheless, closer to home, under the square, in the 1950s, when they were doing excavation work, they found the remains of rhinoceros elephants and the like that were 5 million years old. So it's always been something there. And indeed, Trafalgar Square once would have been under ice, because the ice shelf, many, many millions of years ago, was over it. And of course, last but not least, the greatest fixture of it, people say, are Nelson's column and the 4 lions. The 4 lions are representing 4 of Nelson's victories: Cape St. Vincent, the Nile, Copenhagen, and of course Trafalgar. And they were designed by a chap called Edwin Landseer, who is based in a place called St. John's Wood, just above the northwest edge of Regent's Park. And that's largely famous now for the Beatles' Zebra Crossing at Abbey Road and Lord's Cricket Ground. But Landseer was using dead lions acquired from the nearby zoo atop Regent's Park, and was struggling really to figure out how these beasts sat, and he wasn't going to go in London Zoo. I mean, that's madness. But nonetheless, he based them on how his pet dog sat. That's the legend. The column is 165 feet high, and is meant to be equivalent in height to the foremast of Nelson's great flagship HMS Victory, that is in the city of Portsmouth on the south coast, which is still home to the Royal Navy, as it has been since 1485. But now Victory is having some refurbishment, renovation work. She's suffered from almost 100 years of being dry docked, and the masts have been shortened, so they've taken tops off so they can refurbish it. So technically, Nelson is now taller than his own command. You can't climb inside of it. You can't climb to the top of it unless you're Spider-Man. And Nelson is meant to be looking to either Portsmouth. Some say Plymouth, where his body reached dry land after Trafalgar. And, the whole square is indicative of how we treated heroes back in the day. I mean, Duke of Wellington has Wellington Arch, and everything in London has Wellington's name, it seems, upon it, be it pubs, streets, squares, hotels, whatever. And he, of course, did a great thing. And Nelson, 10 years before Wellington, blunted Boney's aspirations to invade his country. And news of his death took about 2.5 weeks to reach Britain. And I remember for my 200th anniversary celebrations, a messenger went ahead from Plymouth once Victory landed, and had to stop along the way because it took, had to get fresh horses or whatever. And he was taking a message to the Admiralty in London. And news of the death started to spread. Nelson was a celebrity before that word blighted the landscape. And when the king was informed, he said that this man must be honoured as a great hero. So you slap him on the column, you build a square. There's bits and pieces to do with Nelson in London. I mean, if you go to Greenwich, there's Trafalgar Way and Trafalgar Pub, and there's bits elsewhere, but, being a naval man, most of it's down in Plymouth or Portsmouth, really. And indeed, Portsmouth was where he last set foot on dry land before he joined the Victory. Sadly, though, the pub they say he last drank in or visited in Portsmouth was destroyed during the Blitz. Nonetheless, that's Trafalgar Square as best as I can do it. If you are going to go there, take care climbing the lions. I've seen somebody go off it head first. Check out the National Gallery. It's been there since 1824. It's free to get into, including the National Portrait Gallery. And check out St. Martin in the Fields. It's got a nice little coffee shop in the crypt. Words you don't hear often. And next year, if this virus hasn't come back, do check out Passion of the Christ. It's awfully impressive. And indeed, if you can, come at Christmas, because that tree is a gift for Norway every year since the end of the Second World War to thank us for helping them out all those years ago. Have a good one. That's Trafalgar Square, gang. I'm thinking on the spot what to do as such. So, for instance, I was going to bed last night and thought, oh, Trafalgar Square would be a nice topic. Maybe I'll go off the route and talk to you about Wapping, the Thames, Limehouse, well, more Wapping really. Maybe Greenwich, Wimbledon and the Village. So I might go off the track. Maybe I'll even go as far south as Portsmouth if anyone wants it. I don't know as much about Portsmouth as London, even though I spent most of my life in Portsmouth. But you never know, eh? So thank you very much. And I'll be doing a proper vlog. Sometime today, we'll do a glass of red wine if the weather keeps up.